Hi guys, it's Amanda. I'm back for part 2 of the teaching of the book of Ruth, from cursed root to blessed seed. So in part 1 we talked about how Naomi ended up in Moab and how Ruth came into her life, what happened to Naomi's family in Moab, and how Ruth ultimately chooses to return with Naomi to Israel, okay? This is part 2, and we're going to continue this amazing teaching now because this is such an amazing book, okay? So, Naomi is now back in Israel with Ruth. Naomi is convinced the Almighty has afflicted her and testified against her. However, this may look like a setback, but it's really a setup. Naomi doesn't know it yet, but it's a setup with a much greater picture and purpose that the Lord has in mind that's going to emerge, okay? Naomi is about to see that things are not so bitter after all. Here's an important fact. The Lord allowed Naomi to return with Ruth into Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Harvest is the key here. Symbolic as well of the harvest Ruth and Naomi are about to reap. Also, it sets up that Boaz, who is now going to come into the picture, is going to be in Bethlehem overseeing his fields and the harvest process. So this is a setup. Now, here is the backstory to set things up about Boaz. Boaz is the son of Rahab. Rahab is believed to be the Rahab from the book of Joshua, the prostitute who was so desperate to get out of Jericho that she was willing to forsake her own people, betray them, and help 2 Israelite spies hide from the people of Jericho, because Rahab was a smart cookie too. She knew Jericho had been given over by the Lord for destruction, and Rahab, in helping them, saw a chance at her getting out of Jericho, out of that paganism, out of the prostitution, and being given a new life. A way out of the wicked Jericho and her sorrowful life of prostitution. So, because that was a rough life. Rahab lived a rough life, and she saw that as her ticket out. So we have the son of a prostitute, Boaz, and a Moabite woman who used to take part in idolatry. Okay? Interestingly enough, Ruth possesses many of the same characteristics as Boaz's mother. She lived in a wicked, corrupt nation like Boaz's mother. She was involved in a very sinful life like Boaz's mother was. She saw an Israelite as her way out of the destruction of Moab, as Rahab saw 2 Israelites as her way out of the destruction of Jericho. Both wanted a better life and away from the cursed seed of those nations and the cursed root of those nations, and were willing to turn their backs on their own people and those false gods and cleave to Israel to get it. Both left their people and never looked back. So Ruth possesses a lot of the redeeming qualities of Boaz's mother, Rahab. Okay, I don't think it's any coincidence that the 2 of them possess the same qualities. And I think this is one of the reasons Boaz is drawn to Ruth from the start. So when they arrive and they settle in, okay, Naomi and Ruth in Bethlehem, what does Naomi do? Well, Boaz is a close relative of Elimelech's. He is a man of great wealth and really good character. This is important. He has fields filled with grain to be harvested. So Ruth says to Naomi, because Ruth is a smart cookie too, "Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor." Okay, so immediately Ruth wants to hit the ground running and start working. Immediately, okay? She wants to gather the grain, harvest, so her mother-in-law can prepare it for them. Ruth is not sitting on her laurels at all. She is immediately going out there. She is immediately in this foreign land going to work. Okay? She is with a foreign people she has never known besides Naomi, okay? But she trusts Naomi implicitly. And this is what's important. So she takes a big step out in faith, Ruth, and goes into a field of a relative she has never met. And this is the kind of faith and resolve that causes the Lord to work in the most incredible ways. So now she's in Boaz's field. And immediately Boaz takes notice of Ruth and questions the reapers in typical man fashion, questioning about who this lovely girl is in the field. And because he's considerably older than Ruth too, okay, we have to state this. He's considerably older than her. The reapers inform Boaz that this indeed is the young Moabite woman who came with Naomi. The reapers also point out Ruth's work ethic, that she's been working all day except for a short break. So Boaz immediately goes to Ruth and tells her to listen to him, because he doesn't want her to get hurt. He's already endeared to this woman. He tells her not to go glean in another field, to stay close to his young women, and to go reap where they are. He commands the young men not to touch or bother her, Ruth, and they listen because Boaz is in charge. And immediately Ruth finds favor with Boaz and comes under his umbrella of protection. This is sort of a picture of the umbrella of protection we fall under with the Lord when we are obedient and we stay close to him and his kingdom. And when we're with the Lord, okay, it's sort of like when Ruth was with Boaz, where Boaz was constantly watching out for Ruth. The Lord constantly watches out for us. Okay. And Boaz also tells Ruth when she's thirsty to take water from what the reapers have drawn. And he shows a lot of kindness and mercy to Ruth immediately. Now, she's a Moabite woman, so this is a little uncommon for this to happen, okay? For this kind of kindness and mercy to be shown to a foreigner. And Ruth is insecure about this still, okay? She's insecure that she came from Moab. It's sort of like she feels like it's a scarlet letter on her, okay? She kind of almost looks down on herself for it. And she falls on her face in front of Boaz, and we see this right here, and asks Boaz why she has found such favor in his eyes, that he would take notice of her, a foreigner. So she really does see it like a scarlet letter. This is the picture of us on our knees in front of the Lord, wondering how we could have ever found such favor and mercy being Gentiles and sinners. So this is a beautiful picture of us on our knees in front of the Lord. Because Ruth being a Moabite in Israel is equivalent to us being a Gentile, being grafted into the family, okay? So Ruth is about to be grafted in to the family through Boaz, just like we were grafted in when Jesus died for our sins. And here is Boaz's response to Ruth. It's very sweet what he says. It's been fully reported to me all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of her husband. Side note here, the death of her husband basically released Ruth of all duties to Naomi, but Ruth was faithful even after death. She had an amazing character, Ruth, and the Lord saw that. Back to Boaz. And how you have left your father and mother in the land of your birth and have come to a people whom you did not know before. So Ruth's kindness and devotion to Naomi endeared Boaz to her. Even before he met her, he heard about this incredible woman. That was, I think, the Lord kind of planting the seed. Then he does something very interesting for a Jew to do to a Moabite. He blesses her. He blesses her. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. What is interesting about this blessing is, yes, a Jew is blessing a Moabite, which is uncommon. Very. However, this is the same words in Psalm 91. And under his wings you shall take refuge. And what does Boaz say? By the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Very similar. What's even funnier about this is Boaz is giving the blessing, saying, may the Lord repay you your full reward. Okay? Yet he is the man the Lord is going to operate to give Ruth the full reward. Boaz is asking God to let her receive. What's also important about this very moment is Ruth goes from being a cursed Moabite to a blessed woman of God. Like that. in the eyes of the Jewish people, because Boaz was a man of good standing. And when they see Boaz openly bless Ruth, they all take notice. The curse has officially been reversed. As we see now, things begin to shift and take an amazing turn in Ruth's life. In this moment, everything shifts when she meets Boaz. I believe Ruth in this moment was very taken aback by Boaz in a very good way. For she says to him, "Let me find favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant." So she's immediately impressed with Boaz. It appears Boaz was the first man to truly show Ruth kindness and compassion since the death of her husband. And her moving to Israel also. He's the first man to show her this kind of kindness and compassion. And it impresses Ruth. It really does. It impresses her. Now, Boaz now is going to take it a step further. This little budding romance happening here. And he tells Ruth at mealtime to come over and eat some bread and dip it into the vinegar. Let me tell you this. This is going to get more riveting than an episode of The Bachelor. I'm serious. Just watch. Because this is going to get really riveting between the two of them. So he passes to her some grain and some bread, and he's nourishing her. How like the Lord makes sure we're nourished. Not only physically, but in the word. Then Boaz ups the ante and tells his reapers to let Ruth glean among the sheaves where she really is not supposed to be. And he tells them, don't rebuke her. And he also tells his reapers to purposely let grain fall from the bundles for her to glean. So he really, really likes this girl. Okay. So Boaz is going out of his way to bless Ruth. He is partial to Ruth. This is very, very clear. And we are about to see how clear this is. For when Ruth beat out the grain that Boaz had left for her, it came to an ephah of barley. That is equivalent to 35 liters of barley. And just to give you a mental picture here, it's like 17.5 2-liter bottles of Sprite. She brought home to Naomi, filled with grain. That's a ton of grain. A ton. So, you know, this is like what we would call overflow. Her cup runneth over. This is what's beginning to happen. Ruth is being blessed more and more for her obedience and moving closer and closer to the promise. Because we all know obedience is better than sacrifice. So Ruth comes home with 17.5 2-liter bottle Sprites full of grain. Okay, just to give you the mental picture. Naomi, her eyes, I think, were bugging out of her head. She was stunned. And she says, "Where have you gleaned today? Where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." Yes, Naomi knows this could only mean one thing. A Jewish man has taken notice of Ruth, and Naomi knows this is huge. So Ruth tells Naomi that it's Boaz. Naomi's eyes light up because and a light bulb goes off in her brain because she's got a plan. So Naomi's whole attitude right here begins to shift with this one event saying, "Blessed be he of the Lord who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead." And Naomi informs Ruth that Boaz is one of their close relatives. Ruth also tells Naomi that Boaz has taken her under his wing of protection. Now the light bulb's really going off. The wheels are really turning right now in Naomi's mind because she's forming this plan, which we're going to see in a moment. Naomi waits until the end of barley harvest when she knows Boaz is going to be at the threshing floor. Naomi then enacts her plan because Naomi's got a lot of wisdom, okay? She tells Ruth to get herself all dolled up. But he tells her to do something very important. She tells Ruth to wash herself, to anoint herself, and to put on her best garments. 3 things, okay? 3 is important. This is symbolic of Ruth shedding the old man, the old wineskin, and the new wineskin now happening and coming into play, making room for new wine. She is told to anoint herself as well, because she is being birthed into a new life. Naomi wants the Lord to bless what is going to happen that night for Ruth and Boaz, so she tells Ruth to anoint herself. She gives Ruth very specific instructions. Now, Ruth, remember, trusts Naomi implicitly, so she's going to do whatever Naomi tells her to do, okay? Because Naomi knows the Jewish culture. So Ruth is following her lead on this. Now, but Ruth has to follow this to a T for things to go according to plan. Naomi tells Ruth to go down to the threshing floor, to wait until after Boaz is done eating and drinking. She tells Ruth to watch where Boaz lies down, to go to that place, uncover his feet, and lie down, and Boaz will instruct her from there what to do. Can you imagine these instructions for Ruth, a Moabite, going to do this with a Jewish man? Okay? Like I told you, more wild than an episode of The Bachelor. However, this is where obedience is crucial, no matter how crazy it seems. If the Lord is implicitly telling you to do this, you do it. Ruth trusted Naomi, so she was willing to do whatever Naomi told her to do at this point. And this, I believe, was divine inspiration. The Lord giving Naomi this plan. Because Ruth has not been this close to a man since the death of her husband. This took real nerve on Ruth's part. And Ruth understood that Naomi had Ruth's best interest at heart. And she trusted her judgment because this was her people. She knew the cultures of her people when it came to Jewish men. And the courting, we'll say, what happens when they court. So Ruth goes to the threshing floor and does everything Naomi tells her to do. Okay, to a T, she does it. Now, imagine Ruth laying there in the dark, what is racing through her brain. She must have been a little scared, but she was obedient, and that's the important part. That is the key here, obedience. Obedience is what solidifies this plan that the Lord was carrying out. At midnight, Boaz gets startled and turns and sees a woman. And he goes, "Who are you?" And he probably wasn't so nice about it because he got startled. And Ruth says, "I am Ruth, your maidservant." Act of submission right there. "Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." I find Boaz's response to this very telling. "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than you did at the beginning. As you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know you are a virtuous woman." We see Ruth's reputation has been completely restored. The place she came, Moab, does not plague her anymore. The reputation does not plague her anymore. She is a new creation in Christ. The Lord is restoring every aspect of Ruth's life, including her reputation, and he's doing it all for his glory. Boaz informs Ruth that there's a closer relative than he, and he tells Ruth to stay the night. Of course, he's not going to tell her to go, but not in that sense, guys, so get all the dirty thoughts out of your brain. She's just laying at his feet, okay? And says in the morning he'll approach this close relative, and if he cannot redeem it, Boaz will. So Ruth stays there all night, which is such a sweet picture of submission and how we desire to lay at the Lord's feet and glean from him and his word. And that's what it's kind of a picture of in a way. So now we know that Boaz in his heart does not want this relative to get Ruth. He wants Ruth. However, Boaz was a man of character, and so he's trying to do the right thing here. But the Lord's going to reward him for that. Ruth is also given an immense blessing, as in the early hours of the morning, he tells her to take off her shawl, and he pours 6 ephahs of barley into it. If 1 ephah is 35 liters, 210 liters of barley Ruth is bringing home. Oh yes, she's hit the jackpot. This is the overflow. This is the breakthrough. It was probably spilling out, because he'll pour out into such a blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it, as it says in Malachi. Well, when Ruth arrived home, you can only imagine that in true woman fashion, Naomi wants her to sit down and tell her all the details. All the juicy details. So Ruth shares with Naomi all Boaz did for her. Kind of like we share with all of what Christ has done for us. There's a lot of mirroring here going on, okay? So Naomi, towards the end of chapter 3, says something very interesting to Ruth in verse 18. Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. In Exodus 14:13, and Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. It mirrors it. All glory be to God. What Ruth is doing is standing still and seeking the salvation of the Lord. Being Boaz is a picture of the Lord working constantly for us on our behalf. So as Boaz worked feverishly for Ruth, the Lord works constantly on our behalf. Praise and all glory be to God. And he wasn't going to rest till this matter was settled. Okay? So, this is Ruth's salvation. Her redeemer. She is being redeemed from the curse, from the enemy Moab, from her old life. Just as Christ redeemed us from the curse, from our old sinful nature. So here is the picture of it, with Boaz redeeming Ruth. That is incredible. All glory be to God. So Boaz goes to this close relative and takes 10 elders with him. Now this is important. 10 is so important here, the number 10, because you're going to see that it worked in dual ways at the beginning and at the end. You're going to see how the number 10 works. So he explains to this close relative about Elimelech's death. There's a piece of land, but if he purchases it, Ruth comes along with it. Well, this relative says, I cannot redeem it because it may jeopardize my inheritance. I can only imagine at this moment Boaz cracks that grin a man cracks when he knows he's about to get his way. Yep, that kind of grin I can see on Boaz at this moment as he takes his sandal off, hands it to the other relative to solidify the transaction in the presence of the 10 elders. Now, the number 10, Naomi and her family, including the time Ruth was there, married to the son, was 10 years. The number 10 stands for a completed course of time or completeness in divine order. Both these we see at work in the book of Ruth. In the beginning of Ruth, the 10 years stood for the completed course of time Naomi and Ruth spent in Moab together. The end of that cycle at year 10, okay? Uprooting from Moab and planting them in good soil in Israel. At the end of the book of Ruth, the 10 elders Boaz took with him represents the completeness of the Lord bringing into divine order his plan for Ruth to marry Boaz, bringing everything into divine order for the bigger picture that we're going to see in a moment, and working all things together for good. And these 10 elders speak an amazing blessing over Ruth. She was a Moabite no longer. She was one of them. And all the people that were at the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thine house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. Sure enough, Boaz takes Ruth as his wife. She conceives and she bears a son. And the women of the town say to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. They tell Naomi that Ruth is better to her than 7 sons, which is an immensely high compliment, okay? Naomi ends up becoming the nurse to this special child, and this child was named Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. And I just got chills from the Lord as I'm speaking this. Boaz and Ruth became King David's great-grandmother and great-grandfather, which is the line Jesus was birthed from, the line of David. The Lord took a cursed Moabite woman and the son of a prostitute and worked all things together for good, redeemed the curse, which then turned into a blessed and highly favored seed. He redeemed the cursed root, and it turned into a highly favored and blessed seed. Look what the Lord has done. So if you all think for a moment that your circumstances are too great for the Lord, that your background is too damaged, take a good look at Ruth and Boaz and remember, nothing is too difficult for the Lord your God. And he indeed, for your obedience and your willingness, he is willing to redeem you and raise you up to bring glory before men. And he will turn your mess into a message, and he will turn your trial into a testimony, and he will make things anew. So you can stand before men and say, truly, look what the Lord has done. God bless you guys. I love you all. Keep the faith.